There is a culture war happening in plain sight. On one side, baby boomers accused of hoarding opportunity, clinging to outdated values, refusing to move out of the way. On the other side, millennials and Gen Z louder than ever about burnout, rising costs, and a future that keeps getting delayed. The noise is constant. The outrage is endless. But if you look carefully at the edges of all that noise, there is a third group sitting quietly in the background. Not yelling, not trending, not composing 10-part threads about generational injustice. Just watching it all, with a coffee in hand, and a faint, ironic smirk that says, "I've seen this before." That is Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, the forgotten middle child of modern history. Too young to inherit the economic golden age that preceded them, too old to receive sympathy as the struggling youth that followed. They are rarely mentioned until something breaks. And then, quietly, they are the ones expected to fix it. Gen X didn't become invisible by accident. They were trained to disappear. And when you understand the psychology behind that training, you begin to understand one of the most quietly complex generations alive. To understand the Gen X mind, you have to start where the wiring first began: childhood. The most iconic image of a Gen X childhood isn't a family dinner table. It's a house key hanging from a string around a child's neck. In the 1970s and 80s, American families were quietly transforming. Divorce rates were climbing. Two-income households were becoming the norm. More women were entering the workforce, a genuine step forward for society. But it created a childcare gap that no one quite knew how to fill. Millions of children came home to empty houses. They became the latchkey generation. Picture it. It is 3 in the afternoon. The school bus drops you off. You walk home alone, and the neighborhood is quiet. You let yourself in with the key around your neck, and the house greets you with silence. No footsteps, no adult energy, just the hum of the refrigerator. You make your own snack. You do your homework with the television on in the background, not because you are watching it, but because the sound fills the room. If you scrape your knee, you rinse it and move on. If you feel scared, you swallow it. If you feel lonely, you don't yet have the words for what you are feeling. Psychologists call this benign neglect, not cruelty, not abuse, but being physically safe while emotionally unsupervised. Because when you are 8 years old and no one is coming, your nervous system doesn't register the absence as temporary. It registers it as the rule. Help is not automatic. Comfort is not guaranteed. Attention must be earned or abandoned as a need altogether. This is where Gen X's independence was forged. But something else formed too. When you grow up feeling unseen, you don't just become independent. You learn to become invisible on purpose. You take up less space. You develop fewer needs. You solve problems quietly, without announcement, until that coping strategy slowly becomes an identity. The latchkey kid didn't stop needing love. They just stopped expecting it. If any part of this is landing for you, take a moment to drop a like on the video. It helps more people find conversations like this. And if you're drawn to the deeper psychology behind human behavior, consider subscribing. It's the best way to stay connected to this work. What that childhood produced, psychologically, was emotional compression. Gen X was raised in a culture where feelings were treated as inconveniences, things to be managed quietly and moved past quickly. The emotional vocabulary available to them was thin. You were fine or you weren't, and if you weren't, the instruction was clear: toughen up and deal with it. So they developed emotional minimalism. They learned to say "I'm fine" when they meant "I'm overwhelmed." They learned to say "Are you still alive?" instead of "I miss you." Their love language became acts of service, showing up when something breaks, fixing the problem, being present in ways that don't require them to be seen being there, because that felt safer than vulnerability ever could. Sarcasm became their native emotional register, a way to share pain without sounding weak, to connect without fully exposing themselves, to let something true out while keeping it wrapped in irony. The rule, internalized young and carried long, was simple: feel it privately, handle it alone, and move on. The paradox at the center of the Gen X personality is this: The very trait that made them strong is the same trait that makes them lonely. Hyperindependence, the deep, automatic belief that you must handle everything yourself, is extraordinary as a survival skill. Gen X became the people others call when life falls apart. They assess the situation, stabilize the room, and solve the problem before anyone else has finished panicking. But hyperindependence eventually becomes a wall. It creates adults who feel uncomfortable receiving support, who interpret care as imposition, who deflect with a joke, who still hear something in the back of their mind whispering, "Handle it, don't bother anyone." The quiet loneliness this produces isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It is simply the experience of being the strong one for too long, in a room full of people who have never once thought to ask how you are. Vulnerability feels like a foreign language to them, not because they are incapable of depth, but because fluency requires practice that was never encouraged, in an environment that never made it safe to try. If hyperindependence is the engine, cynicism is the armor. Gen X watched institutions crack in real time. Watergate taught them the president could lie. The Cold War taught them tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. The Challenger explosion taught them that even the future could fail live on national television, in the middle of a school day. They were marketed relentlessly and developed a finely tuned radar for the gap between what something claims to be and what it actually is. Their famous whatever was never apathy. It was emotional self-defense. Keep expectations low enough, and disappointment can't reach you. To Gen X, the ugly truth is more comforting than the beautiful lie. Authenticity isn't a value they adopted. It's a survival requirement they developed early because they learned young that the performance of things rarely matched the reality underneath. Gen X is also psychologically bilingual. They were raised in an analog world, slow, physical, requiring real problem solving and tolerance for delay, then watched the digital revolution arrive and reshape everything. They move between hierarchy and flexibility, between the old grammar of authority and the new language of networks. But that constant switching carries a quiet cost. They became the generation of invisible labor, cleaning up messes before anyone notices, carrying the weight of continuity without ever being particularly credited for it. They guard their autonomy the way others guard oxygen, because to a nervous system that raised itself, being controlled feels indistinguishable from being abandoned. Now, in midlife, Gen X occupies the sandwich position caught between aging parents who need increasing support and children navigating an economy that keeps making less room for them. What this produces isn't breakdown, it's high-functioning depression, the particular experience of keeping everything running while something inside runs quietly low. They clench their jaw and keep going. They don't say, "I can't do this anymore." They say, "I'm fine," and find a way to continue. They are the strong ones silently breaking, and they were trained so thoroughly not to ask for help that most people around them have no idea. But something is shifting for many Gen Xers now, a recognition that arrives quietly, usually in midlife, when the cost of carrying everything alone finally becomes visible. The realization is not dramatic. It is simply this: independence doesn't have to mean isolation. The self-reliance that kept them upright through every difficult decade was never the ceiling of what they were capable of. It was the floor they built when nothing else was offered. You were not broken by what you didn't receive. You were built by it. But you are allowed to want more than survival now. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to let people in without threatening the self you worked so hard to become. The key is still there. But the door doesn't have to stay closed.